Hi again, Year 11. This is part 2 of Act 3, Scene 2 of Measure for Measure. We're about halfway through. In the last instalment of this, I talked about this rhyming quartet where the Duke is alone and he reflects on the rudeness that Lucio has just shown and his opinion of the Duke. And then we have Aeschylus entering the stage with the Provost and Mistress Overdone, who we met in Act 1. And Mistress Overdone has been arrested and is being brought into the prison because she's been found guilty of being aboard. So we've got a bit of repetition in the structure of this scene, which started with Pompey being brought in as aboard and arrested and then carried away. And now here's Mistress Overdone being arrested. So Mistress Overdone is quite angry about being arrested, and she says it's Lucio's fault that he has informed on her and told them that she is running a brothel. So she informs on him and says that he's impregnated a prostitute and that he had said that he would marry her when he impregnated her, but didn't because the child is now 1.25 years old. So he definitely didn't carry it out. So she kept that a secret at the time, but she feels quite unfairly about this now because she thinks it's his fault that she's been arrested. So Aeschylus says, whoops, we better arrest him too, and then they take Mistress Overdone off. Then Aeschylus says to the Provost that he's tried to convince Angelo to change his mind, but Claudio will be killed tomorrow as planned. And then the Provost responds to that by saying, well, this friar over here was trying to prepare him for death. And Aeschylus is like, oh, a friar, where are you from? And the Duke cagily responds and says that he is visiting from the Vatican. And so, because obviously in those days you got information from people who had travelled, Aeschylus wants to know what's going on in the world. And Duke's answer to that is very revealing. So he has a monologue where he responds to what's happening in the world, and that's important because it reveals the Duke's approach to the world and the view of his world. So it's some insight into his character. So there are sort of 3 main points in this. The first is where he says, none but that there is so great a fever on goodness that the dissolution of it must cure it. So what he's basically saying there is that the morality of the world has been corrupted, goodness has been corrupted, and he uses the metaphor saying that it's got a fever. And basically he says that it has to die in order to be cured. So morality and goodness need to be killed. So it's basically sort of justifying the severity of Angelo's approach, that anything that steps over the line of the law is immediately killed, so that goodness can be allowed to survive and come back. The second thing that Duke Vincentio says, novelty is only in request. So he's just saying there that people are pretty bored and they want constantly to be entertained by new things. They're not interested in the old things. So this is probably in backlash to Lucio saying that the Duke is drunken and an adulterer. So he's feeling a bit defeated, I think, about the fact that after being in rule for so long, 19 years, one of his subjects thinks so poorly of him. So he says it's as dangerous to be aged in any kind of course or dangerous to be old and experienced as it is virtuous to be constant, to be consistent in any undertaking. And then the third thing that's sort of important, there is scarce truth enough alive to make societies secure, but security enough to make fellowships accursed. So he's saying people lie so much that society is crumbling, but people are wealthy enough, they have financial security, which means that they don't actually have to rely on the kindness of strangers, so they don't even notice or care that society is crumbling. And then he says, this news is old enough, yet it's everyday news. So he says, this is really horrible, so it makes it to being the news every day, but it's been happening for a long time. This is not really new. And then he changes the topic and says, can you tell me about the Duke's personality? So you can see from that he is definitely feeling a bit insecure about his standing in Vienna, based on Lucio's response. But Aeschylus is very positive and says that the Duke, above everything else, contended especially to know himself. So he's saying that the Duke worked really hard to be true to himself and to not be hypocritical, which of course is in contrast to Angelo, who has that false appearance. And again, that's a little bit ironic perhaps, because the Duke is in disguise at the moment. So then the Duke digs a little bit more. What pleasure was he given to? What did he do? And Aeschylus says, rather rejoicing to see another merry than merry at anything which professed to make him rejoice. So he's saying that he preferred to make other people happy, and that made him happy. He didn't do anything for selfish reasons. And then Aeschylus adds another compliment, says, a gentleman of all temperance. So that means that he's moderate, he's measured. So keeping in mind that the title of this play is Measure for Measure, it perhaps suggests that rather having like an eye for an eye type judgment, justice, understanding of the concept of measure for measure, perhaps we're talking about being measured, being moderate. And then basically Aeschylus is like, I don't want to talk about the Duke right now. I want you to tell me about how Claudio is doing. And the Duke replies by saying, well, look, he said that he was ready for death, but he wasn't really, but I've fixed that now. And Aeschylus says, thank you, that was your job. And then he says, I've really tried to get him out of it, but Angelo won't let me talk him out of killing Claudio. And he kills Angelo. He accuses Angelo of being so severe, but he turns it into a compliment by saying that Angelo is indeed justice. So notice the capitalization of justice, which suggests that Angelo has become the embodiment of being just. So he's not moderated or tempered by any other considerations. He's an extremist when it comes to justice. So keeping in mind that concept of temperance and moderation, Angelo does not represent measure for measure. He represents extreme justice. So then the Duke responds to that by basically saying, well, if his own life is just as severe and correct as his law is, then that's a good thing. But if he personally is not perfect, then he's sentenced himself. So he's just talking about the fact that as long as Angelo isn't a hypocrite, it's fine for him to be this strict. And of course, this is an example of dramatic irony, because we already know that Angelo is not straight in terms of his approach to his own life. So then Aeschylus goes off to visit Claudio and says goodbye. The Aeschylus and the provost leave, and so then we get a soliloquy from the point of view of the Duke. So you'll notice here that we're shifting from prose, so see how this part is written out over the whole length of the page. We shift to poetry, so that's when we start to have more of a sense of rhyme and rhythm, and the lines are cut short. Shakespeare's choosing when the lines enter down onto a new line instead of just running it on to the end of the page. So this is poetry, and it starts off outlining the qualities of a good leader. So, he who the sword of heaven will bear shall be as holy as severe, pardon in himself to know, grace to stand and virtue go, more nor less to others paying than by self-offences weighing. So that's the point where he's talking about the qualities of a good leader, so up till there. So the qualities that he's talking about, if you're going to be severe, if you're going to be strict, then you have to be equally holy. So you have to be consistent. You have to have virtue and grace, and you have to weigh up your own self-offences. So you have to punish other people in the same way that you punish yourself. So if you commit a wrong, you have to punish yourself for it, which obviously Angelo hasn't done because he is planning on committing adultery, which is sentencing Claudio to death for, but not himself. This next section here, shame to him who's cruel striking, kills for faults of his own liking. Twice treble shame on Angelo to weed my vice and let his grow. So we're talking specifically in this section about Angelo. And there's a sense, I think, of betrayal or disgust at Angelo, which is shown both by the two exclamations there and also the really, really strong emotive language. So you can see shame is repeated there, and in fact, he's giving him twice treble shame, so 6 times shame. He refers to him as cruel and calls it killing. So he's just saying that it's really cruel of Angelo to kill someone for the faults that he himself has. And then he says 6 times shame on Angelo for, and you've got to imagine this is some garden imagery here. So imagine that the vice of lust is like a weed that's growing through the garden of Vienna. And he's saying that Angelo is quite happy to pull out this weed in other people. So he's happy to kill Claudio and Pompey for it, but he's not going to kill himself. He's allowing his own weeds to continue to prosper throughout the garden of Vienna. So then the next part of this speech is focusing on all men, so it becomes a little bit more generic. So he says, "Oh, what may man within him hide, though angel on the outward side? How may likeness made in crimes, making practice on the times, to draw with idle spiders strings, most ponderous and substantial things?" So the exclamation here, he's just saying, oh, isn't it horrible that a man inside him can have something horrible, even though on the outside he seems to be an angel. So we've got that concept of seeming that occurred earlier in the scene has come back here. So it's the appearance as opposed to the reality of things. And then these 4 lines, how may likeness made in crimes, making practice on the times, to draw with idle spiders strings, most ponderous and substantial things. He's just saying someone with criminal tendencies practice the law and build sort of a web in order to control others and end up making themselves important or substantial. So it's a reference to Angelo, but he's made it abstract, so it could be a reference to anyone, saying that the people in power are corrupt, and that by hiding their true nature and manipulating the law and the rules around them, they're able to continue to be corrupt unbeknownst to the people. And then this last little bit of the soliloquy outlines the Duke's future plans. So he says, "Craft against vice I must supply. With Angelo tonight shall lie his old betrothed but despised. So disguised shall by the disguised pay with falsehood, false exacting, and perform an old contracting." So he's just saying, I've got to be sneaky against Angelo's vice, against his sins. So tonight, Mariana, his old fiancée, is going to lie with Angelo. And so because she has used disguise to get what she wants, we're going to pay back Angelo for being false by being false ourselves. So it comes back to that idea of measure for measure. In this case, it's that idea of justice, that Angelo is being false and deceptive by pretending to be something that he's not, and in payment for that, Mariana is going to be false and deceptive by pretending to be something she's not. And by doing this, we're going to get back to real justice in the long run.